This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Police in Nigeria search for 8 people kidnapped from a treatment center in Kaduna. Search and rescue efforts continue in Japan after landslides kill 3 people and leave 80 missing. And creating green jobs for the youth in Africa. We ambitious cities making strides across the continent. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also ahead this hour. In business, Egypt's expatriates' remittances exceed $250 billion in the last 10 years. And in sports, Guinea's Kung Fu Wushu Federation invites a Chinese expert to train local instructors and athletes. Well, in our top story, we start in Nigeria, where security officials have confirmed the abduction of 8 people from the National Center for Tuberculosis and Leprosy. The incident took place in Zaria City in Kaduna State, in the northern part of the country. 2 attacks are said to have taken place at the same time. One was targeted towards the medical center, and in the other incident, so-called bandits targeted a divisional police headquarters and exchanged fire with police on duty. A search and rescue operation for the abducted people has now been launched. Former South African President Jacob Zuma has told supporters that he is appealing his 15-month prison sentence. South Africa's Constitutional Court last week sentenced Zuma to prison for failing to appear before a commission probing allegations of graft when he was president from 2009 to 2018. Zuma did not turn himself in to authorities within 5 days as ordered by the court. Hundreds of his supporters, some of whom traveled over 400 kilometers, gathered outside Zuma's rural estate in KwaZulu-Natal on Sunday, vowing to prevent his arrest. Top ANC party officials also traveled to KwaZulu-Natal to encourage Zuma to comply with the court order and avoid any further confrontations. On Friday, Zuma filed an application with the Con Court to rescind his sentence, meaning he no longer has to hand himself over for now. The court will hear the case on July 12th. According to his foundation, Zuma will on Tuesday also file an interdict to stop the police from arresting him.
I'm not scared of going to jail for my beliefs. It will not be for the first time. I will be a prisoner of conscience. I'm not asking for sympathy, but justice. My age and health condition and any other mitigating circumstances were not considered when the imprisonment was decided. Sending me to jail during the height of a pandemic at my age is the same as sentencing me to death. The death sentence was declared unconstitutional in South Africa in 1995. As a result of my own sacrifices and those of millions of South Africans.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has been answering questions from the members of the nation's parliament this morning. He's been responding to several inquiries, including around peace and security and the country's budget. Now, this comes as the Tigray People's Liberation Front issued a statement carrying 7 preconditions for peace talks to begin. These include the resumption of power supply, budget provision, banking services in the region, the return of former leadership in Tigray, as well as the release of prisoners. The government, through the Prime Minister, is expected to respond. Well, for more on this, let's now bring in CGTN's Girum Chala, live with us from Addis Ababa. Girum, Any response so far from the Prime Minister to these questions about security and hopes for a ceasefire in the Tigray region?
So, Lindy, as you've said, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was in the parliament during all morning answering questions from members of the parliament. Most of the questions were, of course, economic, about the country's economic situation, and he is there also to get their say on the country's budget, which is supposed to be ratified by the parliament itself. But on security, he said that the withdrawal of the soldiers, first of all, was important. And he emphasized that it is now time for reflection, both for the people of Tigray and for the Ethiopian government, the central government as well, to see which way is better, because war at the end of the day is going to affect both sides. This is the same country, and we have to stop killing each other, and we have to bring law and order back to the nation. So this time is a time of reflection. He said that results are expected to come out, positive results, that is. Unfortunately, what we are hearing, however, is saying that there are still small conflicts happening in that regional state. And the TPLF, as you've said, came up with a precondition of 7 terms. And the central government so far has said nothing about it. But we should understand that the withdrawal of the soldiers, the Ethiopian army, has been widely accepted, including by the UN Security Council.
And tell us more about these statements coming from the TPLF. As you alluded to, they are asking for a number of preconditions to be met for a ceasefire to take place in Tigray. Are some of those conditions considered reasonable? And how do you expect the government to respond?
Well, Lindy, these are 7 terms, which, by the way, you have earlier tried to mention, of the provision of electricity, telecom services, the release of budget from the central government, and also demanding the central government to keep its soldiers out of the Tigray regional state, and others were set by the TPLF. We cannot really verify this at the moment. As you understand, there is no telecommunication service or way of communicating with the TPLF leadership, but we have heard and widely being reported. Now, we've been trying to speak to the Ethiopian authorities. So far, there is no official communication about this one or reaction, but some are behind the door telling us that it is still unfair for TPLF to come up with this kind of preconditions, as the balance of power is not favoring them. And also, they cannot really demand a budget, for instance, from a central government, which they are not constitutionally obeying. But these might be all speculations or unverified. We have to wait and hear from the central government to officially communicate, and we can report it by then, Lindy.
Thank you so much. Girum Chala, live for us there in Addis Ababa. Now, search and rescue operations continue following a massive landslide in central Japan. National broadcaster NHK says 3 people have died from the disaster in Atami. 80 people are still missing. The number was lowered from 113 earlier today after city officials confirmed some had safely evacuated. Torrential rains triggered the landslides in the city of Atami over the weekend. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga told reporters that 19 people have been rescued so far, and 130 homes and other buildings were in fact damaged. More than 1,000 soldiers, firefighters and police are involved in the rescue efforts. They have been hampered, however, by the risk of ground loosening and warnings of secondary damage from rain. Well, countries across the world are experiencing record heat waves affecting millions of people in the Northern Hemisphere. In the past week, scorching temperatures have been recorded in Canada, the US, Cyprus, India, Iraq and Kuwait, among others. CGTN's Timothy Orich has more.
Temperatures and tempers running high in Iraq. Baghdad residents taking to the street demanding an end to cuts to power and water. It was as the mercury exceeded 50 degrees Celsius in many parts of the country. Much of the Northern Hemisphere is feeling the heat. It's been the case for the west coast of the US and Canada, seeing record-breaking temperature spikes. The Canadian province of British Columbia is seeing a 10-fold increase in lightning strikes. The hot, dry ground causes a buildup of static, resulting in lightning. The lightning, in turn, sparks fires, like the one that engulfed the Canadian town of Lytton. It recorded the country's highest temperature ever last week, reaching 49.6 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. Officials say 90% of the town was destroyed by a forest fire that soon followed. But those temperatures pale in comparison to those reached in Kuwait, with the country recording temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius. Social media posts showed digital thermometers reading nearly 70 degrees in the sun.
Honestly, it is the first year that it reaches this scale, where it reached 70 degrees and even 75 degrees yesterday and the day before yesterday. May God help us. This is the heat of life, so how will it be the fire of hell?
Cyprus is seeing its worst fire in decades due to high temperatures. It's left at least 4 people dead, and the country has asked for international assistance in battling the flames. Hot weather has also hit northern India. Delhi is recording its highest temperatures in nearly a decade. Meteorologists say the heat is due to delayed monsoon rains. The Crimean Peninsula, meanwhile, has been pounded by wet weather, causing severe flooding in several settlements. It's similar to the heavy rains that triggered a mudslide in Japan. The city of Atami, where it struck, in just 3 days, has seen as much precipitation as it normally would receive in a month. There's also Elsa, barreling through the Caribbean. It's the earliest 5th named tropical storm on record, and evacuations in Cuba, next in its path, have already begun. On the other end of extremes, snowfall in Brazil, a rare occurrence in the southern part of the country that delighted residents. And while it's more unusual than extreme weather like the soaring temperatures, it begs the question as to what else nature has in store. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Workers in Florida have demolished the remaining part of a condo that partially collapsed last month. In the past 11 days, 24 people have been found dead and another 121 are still missing. Officials feared what remained of the building was too unstable to survive Elsa, a tropical storm that is making its way towards the United States. Authorities say rescue efforts will resume after the demolition. Tanzania is re-energizing its efforts to address the COVID-19 pandemic. The government recently confirmed that it is now part of the COVID-19 Vaccines Global Access Program, or COVAX. Through the initiative, the country hopes to begin receiving vaccines as it announces a 3rd wave of coronavirus cases in the country. CGTN's Isaac Lukando has more.
A COVID-19 committee formed earlier this year has been advising Tanzania's government on how best to deal with the 3rd wave of the coronavirus pandemic. The government says it is now focusing on giving Tanzanians and expatriates living in the country access to COVID-19 vaccine.
Many Tanzanians who are business people have already been vaccinated outside the country. Some have been vaccinated in Dubai, South Africa, and in the other places they visit. They are here in the country going about their business.
While a date for the arrival of COVID-19 vaccines in Tanzania still remains unclear, the government says the country's recent request to join the World Health Organization's COVAX facility is part of a long-term strategy.
15th June was the last date for those who will get vaccines next year in 2022. If one did not voice their intention this June, they will receive their vaccines in 2023. So we sped things up and say that we too wish to be included.
The Tanzanian government says its experts are working on details of which vaccines to import and when. It also says it plans to give citizens options for commercial vaccinations as well as free ones. The Tanzanian government has recently resumed the announcement of COVID-19 cases after a year of silence. The president says there are currently 100 coronavirus patients in the country, with 70 of them in critical condition. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, life in Tanzania appears to be going on as usual. However, the country's Ministry of Health is warning the public to be cautious.
I ask that our health professionals continue to educate the public on the correct wearing of masks. Masks should be worn in all crowded places to avoid infection.
Tanzania recently asked for a $571 million loan from the International Monetary Fund. It hopes that the loan, coupled with its other efforts, will be enough to lessen the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the country and its people. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Despite growing vaccination rates in the United States, a gap has emerged where Black and Latino Americans are falling behind other ethnic groups. Edie's Tianzin reports from Los Angeles.
There are major disparities among certain racial groups in the race to vaccinate as many people as possible in the U.S. against COVID-19. It's especially evident here in Los Angeles. According to the LA County Health Department, those who received at least one shot across the county include 63% of the white residents, 59% Native Americans, and 71% Asian Americans. Only 41% of Black residents and 48% of Latinos have been at least partially vaccinated so far, and the gap is even larger among the youngest age groups. This has also resulted in increased chances of infection and death. The county's health department suggests Black residents are now about twice as likely and Latinos about 60% more likely to be hospitalized with coronavirus than white residents in LA County. They've also roughly twice the risk of dying. Take a listen to what the county's public health director had to say.
We are still seeing significant inequities that translate to greater rates of death among people of color, as I noted earlier. This slide also shows that deaths among people of color are seeing a less of a decline than deaths among people who are white.
She said these inequities reflect the historical lack of medical resources in underserved communities. Some of the lowest income neighborhoods have fewer vaccination sites and people have to go longer distances. Many lower income residents may be working multiple jobs and worry about having to take a day off to get the vaccine. Outreach among some communities has also been limited, with officials still struggling to convince residents the vaccine is free and safe. Many Hispanic residents are worried about registering for the vaccine, falsely thinking that it could negatively impact their immigration status. All these reasons have contributed to lower vaccination rates among Latinos and people of color who've already borne the brunt of this pandemic. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Creating green jobs for the youth in Africa. We feature some ambitious cities from around the continent.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
So far, 6 cities have committed to the recently launched Green Cities Action Program for Africa. The Food and Agriculture Organization-led program aims to improve urban cities through innovative ideas that will make them more sustainable, improve food security, and ensure better lives for all. The Kenyan cities of Nairobi and Kisumu have been selected for the pilot phase of the program. CGTN's Nick Mudimba reports.
It's hard to believe that this was once a dam site. But now the Michuki Park, right at the heart of Nairobi, is now among the cleanest green spaces in Kenya, a serene environment that's become quite popular with city residents since it was opened last August.
It's a nice place na ni kusafi.
It's a nice place and it's clean, so peaceful at the same time and secure. The serenity cools your brain down.
Niliamua kuja hapa juu hii place, by the way, it's so good.
I decided to come here because this place is so cool, very clean, and you feel relaxed. And because there's no dumping site, I come to pray from this place.
Hakuna dumping site, hadi watu wenye wanakujanga kuomba.
The park has not only beautified and changed the dynamics of Nairobi's city, but it has created jobs for many who maintain it. It costs $1 to enter the park that now sees dozens of visitors every day. Such initiatives are what the Food and Agriculture Organization is pushing for through its Green Cities campaign. Launched in September 2020, the initiative aims to improve urban areas through innovative solutions that will enhance not just the environment but also provide economic opportunities. According to the FAO, 55% of the world's population lives in cities today, up from 40% 15 years ago. In another 30 years, in 2050, at least 68% will be in the urban setup, most of them living in low-income countries, especially in Africa and Asia. Urbanization in these areas is accompanied by high levels of poverty, unemployment and insecurity. The Green Cities program hopes to change this by encouraging authorities to involve young people, local entrepreneurs and innovators to find solutions in line with the times, including climate change.
It's not too late to make peace with nature. There's no choice. The choice is either we make peace with nature or we perish. We perish as humanity and of course other species.
When we talk about urbanization, it is related to other things. We can't say we only have to do urbanization. It is related to desertification. It is related to hunger, food. It is related to digital connectivity. It's related to energy. It's related to electricity. It's related to health. So environment. And so I think we must start thinking all these concepts together. And I think on top of it is environment and urbanization. Because if we solve these two things, others will follow.
Kenya's Nairobi and Kisumu have been chosen for the pilot phases of the program, with another 4 cities, Praia in Cape Verde, Antananarivo in Madagascar, Quelimane in Mozambique and Kigali in Rwanda also signing up for the program. FAO is targeting at least 1,000 cities will have joined the initiative by 2030. According to environmental stakeholders, after securing such green spaces, key mandate now will be the consistency of maintaining them from environmental factors and, of course, without a doubt, the human factors. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Meanwhile, the South African city of Cape Town is forging ahead with plans to become the greenest city on the continent. The city hopes to do this through innovation and technology in building practices and policies to spur economic development and boost biodiversity. Cape Town hopes the net result will be a city that is green, sustainable and resilient to environmental challenges associated with climate change. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more with this report.
The city of Cape Town wants to be the greenest and most sustainable city in Africa, an accolade it has been pursuing for years. The momentum, though, is slowly gaining, and the mother city is transforming to a greener and more sustainable city. It is doing this by driving policies that embrace more sustainable building practices, where resilience towards environmental changes are one of its key tenets.
We have in our development plan, which we call in South Africa the IDP, which is set every 5 years and assessed every year. One of the focused intention is to develop a sustainable and resilient city. And you can't do that without being a green city. So we have quite a stringent and a interactive set of policy that enable not only the organization but the whole of the community to follow suit in better our sustainability.
The city hopes more citizens will also embrace new innovations in building technology, which can also assist in going green. My Clean Green Home is one example that is being used to drive home that message to the broader public. The home is fully sustainable and constructed from shipping containers. It also uses solar power and has a vertical food garden meant to allow homeowners to grow their own food. By creating more urban parks, community gardens and boosting biodiversity, more parts of Cape Town are also becoming green.
We have a successful stewardship program where we define a biodiversity high value area, which is not necessarily cities owned, but it's owned by one of our citizens, and they will then, in lieu of a ownership agreement, protect that area, and we manage it jointly.
The city of Cape Town believes the move to become Africa's greenest city provides a strong business case not just for residents, but also for international visitors who are looking to live and invest in sustainable cities. Now, by doing that, they hope to achieve some ambitious goals, including becoming carbon neutral by 2050. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Well, joining us live now is Dr. Robert Gay, the Sub-Regional Coordinator for West Africa and FAO representative in Senegal. He is also the African champion for the Green Cities Initiative and joins us now via Zoom from Dakar. Dr. Gay, thank you so much for your time. First of all, tell us more about the Green Cities Initiative and what it hopes to achieve.
Thank you very much for having FAO to talk about this important initiative, which is Green City, which is the initiative of our DG launched last year in September. It's a pathway for improving urban livelihood in growing sub-Saharan African cities when it comes to Africa, but it's a global initiative. And let me tell you why. This initiative is launched because, as you may know, 55% of the world population reside in urban areas. 70% of all food produced is destined for consumption in cities. 60% of primary energy demand and 70% of CO2 emissions stem from cities. So 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions also stem from food production and distribution. So you can see, these are few statistics. You can see how important cities are. When it comes to Africa, urban growth in sub-Saharan Africa is predicted to be the fastest on the planet over the next decade. By 2050, urban population is expected to increase from 414 million, these figures for 2011, to about 1.26 billion, according for 58% of the entire population. So the urban growth of sub-Saharan Africa is very, very fast, and goes with all the challenges associated with housing issues, water and sanitation issues, diseases, demand for energy, let's say the conversion of forests to build up areas in proximity of human settlement, lack of land management, and so on. So there are so many issues that this growing of African cities is bringing about. So. Right. Because of this, FAO decided to launch this in African cities to improve food security, nutrition, quality of life in urban and peri-urban areas.
And Dr. Gay, then, perhaps more specifically, tell us about how the FAO, how this initiative is engaging specifically with youth across the continent.
The first thing that we are doing is to engage with city authorities first. We have to sensitize the authorities at the highest level. And then through that, influence the policy of cities towards youth, and how this can be used also to reinforce youth employment in cities, because you have to know that the Green City will address urban and peri-urban forestry issues, will address urban and peri-urban agriculture, It will address also urban food systems. Now, integrating all this, youth will be actually in the central, youth and women, they will be in the central of activities to create employment, to even take initiative to for instance, planting trees. The cities have to reserve spaces in the cities that are green spaces, and this is good for the youth as well and for the population. So we are actually working with mayors in, I can say in many cities. We had last time was 6 cities, but the initiative goes beyond the 6 cities to involve more cities in Africa. And youth will be very, very important let's say in the job and also in planting and in keeping these cities green.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for that, Dr. Robert Gay, joining us via Zoom from Dakar. Now, Zimbabwe's government has postponed the reopening of schools due to rising cases of COVID-19. But the suspension of classes means students have been missing out on the benefits that come with the conventional operation of institutions. However, one online tutor has set out to use virtual platforms to bridge the gap in the sector. CGTN's Joy Kiruki has that story.
The continued disruption to Zimbabwe's education sector by the COVID-19 pandemic has inspired educators to bridge the learning gap digitally. This 27-year-old online tutor uses voice notes, audiovisual material and texts to reach hundreds of students through his smartphone.
We are in the 21st century, so we must not be hinged to a scenario whereby a teacher is always standing in front of the students for 45 minutes. We want a scenario whereby if a teacher is sick at home, he or she can teach the students who are at school on the phone. And no lessons must be missed.
Maxwell's lessons cost about $10 per subject each month. Despite this initiative, he says that the importance of physical presence at institutions of learning cannot be ignored.
The schooling system or the conventional schools help a lot in as much as protecting the students is concerned. It protects them from being pounced on by some social vices.
Students who are participating in the online lessons say that the venture has been effective so far. Prospects of higher education is now a possibility.
COVID really affected us, so we couldn't go to school anymore. Lessons were no longer conducted. Everything seemed biased at school, you know. We were just warm. No textbooks, no what. But through online lessons, we could get online textbooks and everything. But at school, we couldn't get those things because due to COVID, it disturbed a lot.
Maxwell himself was unable to attain a university education and hopes to continue empowering students through the available online platforms. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
In your business news, Egyptian expatriate remittances reached $250 billion in the past 10 years. That's according to the country's Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics. The figure accounts for 31.7% of Egypt's net international reserves. From Cairo, Yasser Hakim sheds more light on the role remittances play in driving Egypt's economy.
Mohammed Saad, a resident in Cairo, is one of the Egyptian citizens benefiting from the rise in diaspora remittances in recent years. He receives monthly income from his brother living in the Gulf Sultanate of Oman for his upkeep.
The money is spent on daily expenses, excursions, groceries, but mostly on medication and house rent. It's important for my treatment cost as my income is not enough to cover expenses.
Mohammed is just one of millions of Egyptians who receive money from relatives living abroad. Remittances in the North African state have exceeded $250 billion in the last 10 years, according to the country's statistics agency. While the main sources of hard currency such as tourism, exports and foreign direct investments have dropped due to the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, remittances on the other hand have maintained an upward trajectory. Remittances now account for 31% of foreign currency reserves and are providing a vital support to the economy amid the uncertainty caused by the pandemic.
Remittances provide foreign currency that help in importing basic necessities which we purchase in dollars, especially our food needs. We import big quantities of food and need hard currency for that. That's why we need remittances and other sources of income such as the Suez Canal.
Most of the remittances aid in personal expenses by family members, but the government is encouraging expatriates to also invest in key sectors of the economy.
The Ministry of Migration is easing procedures for Egyptian expatriates to invest in the stock exchange. In the past, it used to be a complicated process, but now all you need to invest is just your passport. There are other investment opportunities such as in real estate. The government is providing housing units at special prices and payment facilities for Egyptian expatriates to invest in this sector.
There are more than 9 million Egyptian expatriates across the world. Over 70% of remittances come from the Gulf nations.
There are difficulties in transfers because of the pandemic, especially in Oman, where cases are increasing daily. We hope it subsides soon.
As the world begins to recover from the fallout caused by the coronavirus pandemic, Trading Economics predicts Egypt's remittances will hike from the current $27 billion recorded in the financial year 2019-2020 to $73 billion in 2022. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The COVID-19 Delta variant is wreaking havoc in South Africa. Last week, President Cyril Ramaphosa placed the country on alert level 4. The restrictions are tougher, especially for Gauteng province, where the variant is particularly prominent. One of the restrictions includes no leisure travel in and out of the province for 2 weeks. Sumitra Naidu takes a look at how the tourism sector is faring.
The tourism industry across South Africa is struggling to stay alive. While the industry across the country is being affected, Gauteng is worst hit. No travel is allowed to and from the province for 2 weeks.
The fact that Gauteng residents or people who live in Gauteng or citizens are not allowed to travel outside of the province, it simply means that you are restricting 60% of domestic travel because it all comes from this province. So it is devastating. A lot more people are gone back at home now, sitting and waiting until the 11th of this month. And a whole lot more businesses are closed until such time that is viable for them to open. So it's going to be devastation.
Alert level 4 of this lockdown will only be lifted after the president gives an update. Until then, restaurants can only do takeaways, no sit-down patrons. Pubs, bars and nightclubs are closed and all liquor sales are prohibited at retail and in establishments.
We have shut down the seated restaurant, which obviously all our waiters and so on are impacted. The kitchen is impacted. We hope that the next 14 days is all that it will take. A longer situation like that means the tourism industry will cripple even more. And many of the smaller businesses might not survive it. And that's the harsh reality of this pandemic.
While South Africans remain in limbo, smaller establishments are battling to stay open. Hotels and other venues are running at massive losses as people stay away.
We have seen some cancellations, Gauteng being one of our core markets. People not being able to travel for leisure does have an impact. We've had a couple of postponements. We're very thankful that not all of them are cancellations. In some cases, however, they are cancellations. We've all been greatly affected by the pandemic and the level 4. Just as we were getting back on our feet, it's a little bit of a step back. However, we do realize the necessity of containing this latest breakout.
We don't know if it's going to be longer than that. And that's what's driving businesses to close. If you look at Sun International, they decided to close their hotels and resorts because it just doesn't make any business sense to remain open. So the lack of certainty and the lack of vaccination, the massive rollout of vaccination, is having a huge impact on our industry.
The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development released a report this week placing South Africa's tourism industry amongst the worst affected in developing nations. South Africa ranked third after Turkey and Ecuador, largely because of travel restrictions, poor virus containment and a poor economic environment. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, job losses and closures of small businesses due to COVID-19 has forced a number of Ugandans into agriculture. This, according to a report by the World Bank. The significant shift to agriculture in response to the crisis has, however, heightened land degradation and deforestation in the East African country. Hilary Ayesiga has more.
Prosper Tuhaise is a manager of a betting firm in the capital, Kampala. Twice the government imposed restrictions to curb the spread of COVID-19. Betting parlors were among the many businesses forced to close. And like many others, Tuhaise had to find something else to do. He decided to put some of his savings into rearing chicken.
There is no income because we are not pressing any bet, which we get money from. Yet, we have to maintain some of the staff, paying them, and also premises we are renting. So we are spending every day, not earning any income.
It has not been an easy transition for Tuhaise. With most of the businesses shut down because of the pandemic, Tuhaise spends much of his time here. He says rearing chicken is helping him to feed his family. Tuhaise is hoping to make a profit from rearing chicken, but also from the other crops he grows on the farm.
The good thing you can do without betting in lockdown, but you cannot do without food. So farming, that the food production remains whatsoever, whether there's lockdown, whether there's pandemic, whether there's anything. So that's where the only business you can do when there is total lockdown, because people must keep eating.
Figures from Uganda's Bureau of Statistics show that 70% of Ugandans are involved in agriculture. According to a June 2021 World Bank report, the significant shift of Ugandans to agriculture in response to the crisis has heightened land degradation and deforestation. That too is a concern for environmentalists.
This whole area was forested about 30, 40 years ago. There's nothing left. There's a little patch over there and a little bit of swamp there. So, I mean, forests are being cut down seriously, even in Uganda, even in forest reserves.
According to Global Forest Watch, Uganda has lost 7.6% of its tree cover in the last 18 years. The government is now encouraging tree planting in degraded areas. For the new farmers like Tuhaise, without work now, putting food on the table during this period remains a priority. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
For a while, it seemed as though Chinese tech IPOs in the US market had slowed from a flood to a trickle. But the momentum is back and investors are warming up to the Chinese tech companies once again. Ying Junyi has more.
Chinese technology companies are flocking to the US for IPOs once again. More than 30 Chinese tech companies raised more than $10 billion on Wall Street in the first half of the year, and another 30 or more are expected in the next 6 months.
Many of these companies received early funding in their early stages from US dollar investors or from US dollar private equity funds. These private equity funds are seeking an exit, and that exit will be better expressed if these companies go public in the US.
The boom of Chinese tech IPOs in the US is driven by a desire to tap the deep pools of liquidity available there. Shou says many Chinese tech firms have managed to secure relatively elevated valuations in the US market. The IPO regulations there are also resulting in a current cluster of flotations on the US exchanges.
Obviously, many of them are relying on the 2020 annual reports to be included in their prospectus, and they have a grace period of roughly 9 months, meaning they need to submit the IPO within 9 months. Otherwise, they will have to prepare the first half semi-annual report in order to supplement the prospectus.
The relative attractiveness of the U.S. market has also been increased by recently tightened criteria for listing in China. In fact, more than 90 companies have withdrawn IPO application in China this year.
Regulators are paying more attention to IPO applications and requiring stricter information disclosure. They are also spot-checking some of the IPO candidates. The revised securities law has an increased emphasis on protecting the interests of small and individual investors.
The number and scrutiny of listing hearings in China have increased, and the new law levies tougher penalties for any market violations. Ying Junyi, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
On a mission to serve Kenyans by cutting hair, a young entrepreneur's dream to start a mobile barbershop has come to fruition. As CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy reports, Ali Barkat's barbershop on wheels reaches people wherever they are.
Yes. It's about 6 in the morning. Ali Barkat is set to meet his first client of the day. It will take approximately 30 minutes to reach his client. Barkat must maneuver through Nairobi's heavy traffic, one of his worst nightmares.
Because I can't cover enough people in a day because of the moving around in traffic. So I have to have my first client by as early as 5 a.m. You know, and because of curfew now I find myself having my last client as late as 8 p.m.
Barkat is determined to keep his mobile barbershop dream alive.
So I have to sacrifice that sleep, you know, just to be able to cover more people.
He finally meets his first client of the day, Alan Styles.
He's been cutting my hair for a while. There's a certain level of convenience and professionalism that he carries. Because you know nowadays, by the time you commute to a fixed barbershop and get a seat and get cuts, you end up losing a lot of time.
Obviously it's important for me to keep time because Mr. Allen has already scheduled himself, you know, so it's always best just to keep time so that even it can be more convenient for him.
Barkat is one of Kenya's innovative youth changing the game when it comes to barbers.
The things I truly appreciate is when every service is handled professionally and dedicated and committed, because I believe that's how industries grow. If we put in our dedication, our work and our commitment to the service.
During the lockdown, Barkat decided to convert his van into a mobile barbershop. He charges $30 for a haircut, wash, and face cleansing services.
That's been good for me because I'm constantly, every day I'm meeting new people, you know, going to new locations, you know, places I had never been to, you know, so yeah, man.
Barkat is also very particular when it comes to appearance while on the job.
As a man, a suit makes me feel confident about myself, you know. Number two, ever since I thought of being a barber, I always pictured myself in a suit, you know, with the suspenders, just a half coat and a shirt, you know. So it's always been my niche, you know.
Barkat hopes to expand his business by modifying a larger van exclusively for women and women alone. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Coming up in your sports news, up next. Guinea's Kung Fu Wushu Federation invites a